Robbie Bettelon of the Detroit Bad Boys on, and he's going to take us through his thoughts on the successful yet injury-riddled Pistons season here so far. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. We've been cycling in some folks from Detroit Bad Boys. I like that publication. They do some great work covering the Pistons, and we cover the Pistons every week on the show. This has been a great season to do it because they've quietly been the top team in the East. They're still not really getting the recognition. I think that win over the Knicks helped. But fans of the show will also recognize why I like this guy, because a lot of his writing has a lot of automotive puns with covering the Pistons. So I like that. I like anybody that incorporates puns into their work. So happy to bring on Robbie Bettelon of the Detroit Bad Boys. And Robbie, I know you haven't been on the show before. We celebrate the thing of the day, and this one's kind of a niche thing here. It's National Hot Tea Day. I am a tea drinker, but I can't imagine you are. But hey, you can't make assumptions, because you know what happens when you make assumptions. So do you drink any tea, or what is your caffeine of choice?
I do not drink tea, unfortunately, but I will say my fiance does, and I feel like she offers me some chamomile tea maybe every other night. I'm worried about getting up in the middle of the night. I like my sleep, so I'm more of I'm a coffee drinker, just black coffee, put it in the Keurig, no creamer, no nothing, put some hair on your chest and start the day. So that is my go-to source of caffeine.
Well, I'm wondering, since she offers you chamomile tea specifically, is she trying to get you to calm down a little bit?
Yeah. Get to bed right away, just once it hits 8:30, it's chamomile tea time. We got to start turning the lights down.
Oh boy! So that's going to be like soon after your appearance. You're going to have to wind down here, so we can't get you too riled up on the show.
Yeah. Luckily, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee currently, so I am in Central Time. I am no longer in Eastern time when I used to live in Michigan. So I at least got another hour.
Oh, phew. Okay. So it's not tea time for a little while. Okay.
Not yet.
Well, I'm excited that we can get you a little pumped up then, because the Pistons have been pumping me up all year here, because we cover them regardless of record or how they're playing, but it's been a great year to cover them. But it's just funny to me, the narrative on this team the whole year, because they've been, the further we go, they still stay atop the conference. They're knocking out most of the other teams in the league here. They're playing consistently very well with an inconsistent lineup. They had that whole stretch where they had some odd lineup constructions that I never would have been able to guess at the beginning of the year, and now they're kind of headed back into a period like that. But I'm curious how you take this season in so far, because it's like a lot of the examples on the court are showing that they're for real, but then all the talk is about, okay, well, who are they going to trade for? How are they going to improve? It's like, well, they're the top of the Eastern Conference, so I don't know how much they can improve. Doesn't mean you can't improve, and I know they're a young team, but it's just funny that we're focused on improvement like they're at the bottom of the conference rather than the top team.
Yeah, if you would have reached out to me 2 years ago and asked me to come on, I would have been like, Ryan, are you sure you want to talk about the Pistons right now? But nowadays, it's crazy going into every game and assuming, like, you're expecting a win nowadays. And in my writing, I try to look for areas of improvement. And I totally think you're right that it's so interesting of, like, oh, the Pistons are still missing, like their second piece next to Cade, or, is it time officially to make a big swing at the trade deadline and go for it when, in reality, they're sitting at number one in the Eastern Conference. I think they're 3 or 4 games above the Knicks and the Celtics right now. And you're totally correct. That game against the Knicks, about a week ago, may have been like the best complete game that I have seen them play in years. So it is a very different spot to be in, but one that I have very much enjoyed, but I do not think that I have fully gotten used to it yet. So trying to enjoy every game along the season.
Exactly. Well, 2 years ago, I was still watching every game, which some of my friends would literally check on me and be like, "Really? You're watching every game?
Good friends, yeah.
Yeah, are you okay?" But yeah, I'm loyal to my teams no matter what, and now especially covering from them for the show and everything. It's a necessity, but it's fun that they have been better here, and like you said, better in a fun and entertaining way. This is the type of team that we're used to as Detroit fans and people who cover the Detroit teams. They're the consummate grit type team. That's obviously been a Lions term, but all of the Pistons, that really started with the Pistons. You had the bad boys, you had the going to work group, and now I think we're closing in on a nickname for this team. I wasn't a fan. I loved the going to work group as a team. I really wasn't. The nickname just didn't seem to hit for me, and now we're closing in on the nickname here. So I'm not sure what you think of those two nicknames. You can't argue with the bad boys. That's what you're named after too, your publication.
That's the OG nickname. I was there in 2004, the going to work days. Me and my dad. Gosh, I was maybe like in 5th grade or maybe middle school or something. But we went to that Game 5 against the Lakers together. So I will always have a place in my heart for the going to work teams. But I'm trying to think. I heard it was another Pistons podcast, maybe on Blue Sky, called them Back to Work, which I enjoyed as like a reference back to the glory days. And I will say I have very much enjoyed the Lions' success kind of bleeding into like the other Detroit sports teams. Like it does seem like the Pistons have kind of taken on that gritty, that like defensive, physical kind of mindset that the Lions have had. And really, I just think it's kind of like a city mindset, like just a Detroit mindset. And I think it was J.B. Bickerstaff who, back when we hired him last year, said that this team is going to like look like the city. It's going to embrace the city. It's going to play like the city. And he has fully manifested that. And they absolutely, I think only the Thunder are a better defensive team than them right now. So I will say it's so much better that the Pistons are good defensively than if they were to be good offensively. I think like it just makes that season so much more sweeter that they're doing it on the defensive end, like they used to do with the bad boys and like how they used to do with the going to work days.
That's one of the reasons why I think more convinced than maybe some of the people that talk about it kind of on the national stage, or the people that look at the holes. I see the holes too, and there's holes in every team, no matter where you're at. You want to improve and make sure that you can try to fill those, especially if you are a team that's close to contention and that could kind of get you over the hump. The funny part about the talk with them improving, it's never really like, oh, well, this will make them a finals contender. It's like, this will make them in the hunt. I think they're in the hunt now. I don't know how everybody's math is, but it seems like they're in the hunt with the standings and everything. But I think that part of the reason it's the style that makes them contenders, because they don't have things that don't travel as well. Like if they were heavily dependent on outside shooting or different elements like that, then you'd go, okay, well, yeah, this could go flat in the playoffs. And then what do you have? Defense rarely goes flat. That's something that travels well to other buildings. They clearly like playing in these other environments and in New York. Like if they matched up against New York again, they would, I think, be up to the task. They clearly struggled with that a little bit, playing at Madison Square Garden as a newer team, younger. They hadn't been to the playoffs. They'd had that vast improvement that you alluded to. So all of that, now it's different this year. I think they're a little bit more battle tested, and even though they're young, it seems like they're oriented to make a bit of a playoff run, and that's still maybe with a change. I'm not necessarily advocating no change, but I'm also not looking for a big swing either.
Yeah, I think that will be the talk of the next month or so leading up to the trade deadline. Is I think you have to make a swing. It just depends on how big of a swing? Are you bunting to get to first, or are you swinging for the fences? And I totally agree with you. So I was a high school math teacher back in the day. Also used to do some coaching at our high school, and we always used to tell our kids, like, we have to be the best at the things that we can control, and we could control the effort that we put into every game defensively. And I think that's exactly what the Pistons are doing. And, no matter where they're going to play, no matter where they're at, you know that they're going to bring it on the defensive end. Like JB Bickerstaff has done such a good job of instilling that culture. And then also, to Trajan's credit, I think he's acquiring the type of players who embody that as well. Like, I love that some of the guys call themselves a dog, the dog pound. Stu winning Eastern Conference Defensive Player of the Year. He should be a candidate, or of the month. He should be a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. And I think one thing that has got to be so devastating for opposing teams is, hey, who's your best player? Well, Asar is going to be on him to start the game. Oh, Asar is coming off the bench? Well, we're going to put Ron Holland in, and good luck with Ron Holland at this point. There are so many point-of-attack defenders, people who are willing to guard you full court, that when you get to a playoff series that, could get 7 games, those are exactly the kind of guys that you want on the team, wearing those opposing stars down. You don't want them looking forward to the next matchup when they, are taking 36 minutes against Asar on defense. So I feel like I fluctuate day after day on what kind of a swing I want them to take, but I also feel like I can understand the vision based on whatever it is that Trajan wants to do.
I'm with you. I mean, there's definitely different levels to it. And I mean, it is kind of a wide open field to a degree. That was the talk at the beginning of the season. And I feel like this happens a lot in sports, where it's like the teams that were in the conversation kind of stay in the conversation for longer. We see this in say the college rankings. If you're ranked up high at the beginning of the season, it's harder for you to fall even if you're losing. Whereas if you have to stack some wins together if you're not a team that has that reputation. I'm an Indiana alum, so I saw this with my football team over the last couple of years. It took a while to get up to the top there. And so you kind of see that with the Pistons this year, because at the beginning of the season, we all could see the landscape on the Eastern Conference side of things. You had Halliburton out, the team that arguably would have won the finals had he been there for the full 7th game. You had Tatum out as well for the majority of the year. So now you're taking out 2 of the biggest contenders, and so now it's kind of wide open. You got a Knicks team that's maybe been run into the ground by Thibodeau, so you didn't know what was going to happen there. And then all these other teams got mentioned in the conversation. Okay, Orlando's making a move. Atlanta's making some moves. But since the Pistons didn't take that swing, they often didn't get included in the conversation. Now they find themselves at the top without making a big move. And I'm usually of the mindset of, hey, build up that young core, keep the culture, invest in that, and then kind of layer things in when you know you've got a solid core that won't be too far affected, and bring in a guy that you're pretty sure is a good culture fit. And I think that's obviously what they're going to look for, because as you mentioned, they're not necessarily needing to really reach too much. Like, I see some of the names that are mentioned, and some of them are like, okay, I understand the on-court fit with a guy like Michael Porter Jr. I personally don't think that's necessarily the direction that they want to go, because I think there's too much volatility as far as his value is kind of high relative to what he'll actually bring in. And I don't know if he's a great fit with the current format as far as the team culture side of things. Yeah,
I think MPJ is going to be that name that we hear frequently over the next month. He fits at a position of need. His greatest skill set is his outside shooting, which, if there's anywhere that this Pistons team can improve, it's going to be, putting somebody else in the starting lineup who can space the floor with Duncan, as opposed to him being the only one to space the floor. Agree, though, that I think, like, what they're building culture-wise, you can't bring in somebody who is going to change that, who's going to affect it negatively. MPJ seems to be like a guy who could solve a lot of problems on the court. Off the court, don't know enough about him. I know that there are things that have popped up with MPJ over the past few years, so I don't see that type of swing. I don't see a Lauri Markkanen type of swing, a Jaren Jackson Jr. kind of swing. They do have their trade exception still from this summer, so they do have a $14 million exception where they could absorb somebody who makes $14 million or less without having to give a player back. And one thing I actually learned from the Pistons Pulse from the Freep, they had Keith Smith on. And so I did know that any two-way player, so really this is for Dennis Jenkins, you can be active for 50 NBA games. He has already been active for 38. I think we played 38 games so far, and actually the 50th game is right on trade deadline day. So if there happens to be a move that Trajan makes, if it's a 2-for-1, a 3-for-2, something along those lines that opens up a roster spot, it also works out well to bring Dennis up at that same time and make him, a full-time player on the NBA roster instead of a two-way player. But I guess it's hard to go off of Trajan's history in Detroit, given that it hasn't been too long, but he hasn't taken a swing yet. I don't expect him to take one at the deadline, which is why I'm feeling more the bunt single route is what's to be expected, whether that's, helping facilitate a trade. Like if Minnesota needs to get off some money, we could absorb Dante DiVincenzo. There's Sam Hauser in Boston. There's Max Christie in Dallas. I do think that with this bunt single, you just have to address the lack of three-point shooting that the team has. That has been my only, I guess if you even want to call it an issue with the team. It's just I've pointed out in my articles on Detroit Bad Boys of just some spacing that gets a little bit wonky on the court with Asar and Duran sometimes in the same spot. But ultimately, I think they just need a little bit more shooting, and I don't think you need an MPJ or Lauri Markkanen kind of player to get that.
I agree with you. And you had suggested a player that I've always had my eye on. So I want to talk about him after the break and some of the iterations of how these things could look. But definitely the shooting will be the emphasis there. But we'll come back with Robbie Bettelon of Detroit Bad Boys after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Robbie Bettelon of Detroit Bad Boys, having a good conversation about the Pistons and some of the iterations of trades, of how that could look, and some of the players. You hit on a few of the names that kind of gotten aggregated over time. I feel like we can't have a discussion about the Pistons and the trade deadline without having a Hauser reference. I think we're now, I don't remember how many, but like 4 for 4 on that with 4 different pundits on here. But it is a good name. I mean, it's one of those things marrying up the concepts that you're talking about. Boston could be one of those teams in a position to shed a player, shed some salary with where they're positioned right now. So he would be one of those guys that could be on the outside looking in. And they're one team, not that you can never really have too many shooters in the NBA, but they're a team that's a little stocked full of shooters. So you could see them maybe dealing somebody. But I'm glad you brought up the point about Jenkins, because I brought that up on the show before. That's one of the main reasons you really need a move, is because you have to clear a roster spot at this point to get him on full time. I wasn't aware of that exact timing, so that is good timing there. I knew about the 50 game thing. I didn't know it fell on the trade deadline, but there, it seems like there are some players too that, although I think people are generally pretty happy with how the team has played, obviously as a whole, and a lot of the individual players have played. It does seem like there's maybe a couple pieces that you could kind of get rid of and not have a substantial downturn too, because you do have some depth pieces that you talk about. Jenkins has kind of found money. Sasser's come back into the fray and looked pretty good, and so there's some players. That's kind of how I think about it sometimes. That I look at the Pistons side of things, and rather than thinking, okay, what would we need to give up to get Markkanen or one of these big names? More so, it's okay, who could we package together that it's probably good to move on from them, and then what could we get in return as far as a salary and skill combo there. But I'm wondering if you have some players identified. I have a couple in mind.
So I think Dennis may, like the whole Dennis situation of him just like proving that he belongs on an NBA court this season may be what forces Trajan's hand a little earlier, because at the beginning of the season, I remember thinking like, Ivy was coming back from injury. Sasser he was injured at the start of the season. We brought in LeVert, and we were kind of hoping, he was going to handle like those backup guard minutes. But at the beginning of the year, it was like, man, this team kind of doesn't have a ton of depth in their guard spot. And now it's like, okay, I think you got too many guards at this point. I think Dennis could handle backup point guard minutes. I think even Sasser, I wish he could play a little bit more, but I guess just with the rotation being that size, it's hard to fit him in there. But I feel like Tobias is always going to be thrown in to trades, mock trades leading up to the trade deadline with his $26 million expiring contract. And I think Jaden Ivey, with just the plethora of guards, you're going to have to extend him this summer, so he is due a new contract. I just feel bad for him in this whole situation from the Monty thing to the broken leg. It's just like he's been trying to find his place these first 4 years of his NBA career, and I'm just wondering if maybe that's not in Detroit. So if you're looking at a package of Jaden Ivey, Tobias Harris, and a first, if you're trying to make a swing, if you're going after like a Trey Murphy in New Orleans, that's going to take probably at least 2 picks. The first 2 that come to my mind are Tobias and Jaden Ivey, but even then, like, I feel like Tobias has done a great job setting the culture. One thing you and I can talk about is like, oh, Tobias makes sense as, a money piece. Like, he makes this much money, but we have no idea the impact that he's had on those guys in the locker room. Is it possible that when he comes back from injury, like, he takes a bench role and then Isaiah Stewart starts at power forward? And if Stu can start shooting more threes, I think that would be fantastic for this team as a team that needs more three-point shooting. So I feel like the ones that we will see the most in trades will be Tobias and Jaden Ivey. But getting rid of Tobias, you have to bring in somebody to take his place. Like if you get rid of Ivy, you could get whoever because you have depth there, but we do not have depth at power forward. So based on Tobias's ability to be a part of the culture, be that veteran on the team, and really he's still playing at a position of need, I don't know how likely he is to be moved, but he certainly has the contract that would be needed to make the money equal.
That was a great summary of the situation, and I have to say I agree with basically all of it, because it's just there's a lot of nuance to it, and I think you hit on a lot of the nuance of it. I'm basically on the same path with Jaden Ivey. I think he can be a very good player in the NBA. I don't have a lot of doubts about him. Yeah, he's come back and not really found his way into the rotation and been a little slow. I think there's a lot of ways to explain that away. He's coming off of back-to-back injuries. He didn't have camp with everybody. Now he's getting on what essentially is a moving train, one that has a whole cadence unto itself, and he's trying to get his part of it. Well, those guys aren't used to playing with him. They're not used to what spots on the floor he wants the ball and where he wants to rotate and all of those things, because even if they played with him before, it's a different iteration. There's a lot of new players. There's players that have grown. So I agree with you. I'd almost hate to see it. Also, Javen Hunter, his dad, is a friend of the show. So so there's that element too, because we have Javen on the show and he's a great guy. He played here in Michigan. He played basketball. He had Detroit Country Day when I was growing up here in Michigan, and he then became an NFL athlete, and that's a whole athlete riddled family here. But yeah, I like Jaden, but it's clearly not really a fit right now, both in kind of the play aspect, but you can see just from some of his body language things that he's just feeling it a little bit. It doesn't mean he's a malcontent or anything that where people kind of go to the extreme. It just means you can tell he's not really feeling the flow right now with the Pistons. And I think there's some teams, because this is the other element you have to consider with him, there are some teams that will want to take him on to potentially have the first chance to sign him, because I think that's the other part I'm worried about, that even though it hasn't gone great here in Detroit, his market still seems to be pretty high. Now that's a lot of conjecture, but it seems like there's a lot of teams that do see the potential in him and say, okay, let's have him as our primary guy, our primary ball handler. I think that'll look pretty good. And so when that's looming too, and you're having to focus on re-signing a few guys, you've got Duren as well in the same class, then you've got Thompson next. So if there's somebody that kind of has to be left out of a chair with the whole musical chairs game, then maybe it's Jaden that has kind of worked his way into that situation, really by no fault of himself. It's more the injuries and some of the coaching fit issues, especially with Williams.
I agree. It's kind of like a timing thing with Jaden. Like, by default, he just kind of, from a timing standpoint, has fallen into that, like, well, he's coming off a couple injuries. He doesn't seem to have the burst that he used to have at Purdue or his rookie year. And right now he's still finding his place in the rotation, whatever that is. And I thought as he was coming back from injury, like, it was weird not knowing if he was on a minutes restriction or if he wasn't, because sometimes he wasn't getting over 15 minutes. It's gone up a little bit more recently, but yes, to no fault of Ivy's, it's just by default he has kind of become like, hey, if you're going to pay Duren, it's going to make it harder to pay Ivy. And if you plan on paying Asar the next year and then Ron Holland the year after that, I did not think, you brought up a good point about him still being a restricted free agent. If somebody is comfortable paying him this summer, you can go ahead and trade for him at the deadline, get a head start on getting him in the organization, on the court with, his new players. If there is a team out there that's, looking to take a flyer on him. I will say, so in one of my articles, I wrote that I felt that the power forward in between Asar and Duren essentially needs to be a Duncan Robinson kind of player, right? Like somebody who's, 80% of their shots are threes. And so I was looking for types of players that are doing that at the power forward position. And I found somebody that actually played on the Pistons before, who's making quite a bit of money right now on his current team. But you could trade Tobias straight up for him, and maybe they would be willing to listen, given he's got 2 or 3 more years on his contract. Any ideas, Ryan, of who I'm talking about?
You're putting me on the spot here. I'm trying to run through some of the past.
Not even my show, but I'm going to.
I love it.
The question.
No, I love it because I could see where you were going with the question. If I had your articles up, so if I was, but I moved to a different browser here, moved to a different tab, so I can't cheat that way. But it's so yeah, I'm running through when you said a decent amount of money that excluded a couple of the guys that I was thinking of, because they have had some guys that have filled that role as far as a shooter. They're not necessarily that same as a Duncan Robinson, because you've got, like, say, a Trey Lyles. That's definitely not who you're talking about. You've got Jeremy Grant with the Blazers, but I don't think either of those guys is a fit. So you're going to have to help me out here. This was good. I can't. Those are my two guesses, and that's not it. So you got to help me.
You're right. It is it. It was Jeremy.
Was it Grant? Okay, I wasn't sure. Yeah. And I knew it wasn't Lyles, but the Grant was where my mind went after that. But I wasn't sure, because he's been kind of vacillating back and forth in that Blazers lineup. It's
weird. He kind of starts, kind of doesn't. Right?
Yeah, because they had the presence of Avdia there, where now that's changed a lot of things, I think, for them, and obviously now they have, unfortunately, this is a former Piston from the Going to Work group, but they have the uncertainty at the coaching position there with Billups having to take the time off now, but that's I do see the fit there. We got to take one more break here, but I want to come back and talk about that, because we still didn't get to the name that I saw you have on your X. I didn't see that article about Grant, but I'm glad I guessed it, though. I'm glad I thought my way through it. But there's another younger guy that I feel like may be in the mix there for a shooting big man. So we'll talk about that with Robbie after the break. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
From the Scully Statewide Moving Studios.
Country with a Twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
Coming back here for a third segment with Robbie Bettelon, having a good conversation with him. We've got a lot to tie up in 8 minutes here, because I've had notes written down, and there's a few things, so we're probably not going to get to everything, but we'll also try to have Robbie back on the show, because he's been a great guest here. But I like the Grant thing. That I wanted to get to the name that I've been teasing here, because it's a young guy. It would kind of fit at least the kind of youth arc of the Pistons, and I think skill set wise it would fit well. Don't have a feel for his personality as far as the culture goes. He's more of the European background, but Santi Aldama was the guy that I saw on your X there, and you're the only one that I've seen bring that one up. That's a unique one, and I liked that one because I've wanted the Pistons to target him for a while, because we knew this was a need even at the beginning of the season, and before the season, headed into the season. I thought they would address it a little bit more. Like you said, Tobias Harris has been great for the team. He's Uncle T. He's helped the team out a lot, but I do think that between the fact that he's got that expiring deal, they've got some guys that may fill a version of that role, the starting four position. Do you try to beef up the shooting there? Because I was hoping his shooting would improve as he got older, because that happens sometimes. Al Horford comes to mind, where it's like, where did this 3-point shot come from? But he adjusted to the game. Lopez is obviously an extreme example, but Harris's shot has just stayed so flat that there just hasn't been a lot of improvement as far as the percentages go. That's not to knock him, because he's been a great contributor, but it's more back to the basket, mid-range kind of stuff. So I think eventually it makes sense with a lot of the pieces that you're keeping, Thompson, Holland, Stewart, that you replace that position, that role, with a guy that's truly more of a stretch big in the composition that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's what I think that's this team's missing piece. Like, I like Tobias. I think he's been great at power forward for us, but he's not, this knockdown shooter that teams fear, whereas Duncan, for example, I had to look it up over the break. He's shooting 7 3-pointers a game and shooting them at 39%. So the reason why I thought Jeremy Now, Jeremy will have his own pros and cons as well, but Jeremy's shooting 39% on 6.5 per game. So, it doesn't have to be Jeremy Grant because, of course, you're going to have injury issues and the money and all that. But a guy like Santi Aldama, a guy like I've seen Bobby Portis come up frequently, just somebody whose main role is like spread the floor, stand in the corner while Cade and Duran run their pick and roll. And when the defense collapses, Cade will find you, Asar will find you. We just need you, to let it fly from three, because right now I feel like the only one in the starting lineup that is really a feared shooter is Duncan. And I know that we've talked about playoff, defensively, but I do worry offensively, like, is the opposing team going to put a center on Asar and leave Asar wide open? Like, are they just going to live with Asar shooting jump shots? And in that case, like, you've got to have more shooting on the floor. You've got to get creative in your ways to get Asar downhill, but you got to have the spacing to do it as well. So I feel like that's where the bunt single, if we're not going, an MPJ route, it's like get somebody who's really good at standing in the corner, letting their teammates do their thing, and when they're open, they catch, they shoot, they let it fly. So I think any of those tall kind of stretch bigs that can kind of play fringe starter, fringe bench minutes is probably the ultimate way to go.
I like some of those names that you talked about. I also like that I teased the fact that people get into the conversation too much about trades with the Pistons, and now we've been talking about it for a while, but it's a good conversation, and these are some good names here because there's a couple I want to highlight out of what you mentioned, because I want to go back to one from the previous segment and hit a couple there. We talked about Aldama. I think there's 3 different lanes here that we've kind of highlighted a little bit. We know what they need, the stretch big. Aldama's kind of the young option that can grow with the team long term. There's another in that category that would be a bigger swing. You mentioned him the previous segment. To me, I would put this guy priority-wise above a Michael Porter Jr. because I think he's a better fit for the culture of the team potentially, and management has some experience with him. But I would love to have Murphy on this team. I think between his defense and his shooting and his team-friendly contract, all of those things would work out very well. And if you could package, I'd hate to see him go, as I mentioned, Ivy and Harris, and attach a couple picks to that, I would do that in a heartbeat. I think that would be kind of that subtle move that gets them over the top for the long term. Who knows what happens this year, but it's a guy on their same arc. The name that you mentioned, though, is one that I've thought of, and I've brought it up to people, and they've said, well, aren't you worried about him fighting with Beef Stew? But I don't know if you're familiar with the movie series The Mighty Ducks, but they had the Bash Brothers. Yeah. So they had the Bash Brothers where they disagreed when they were on opposite teams, but when they got on the same team, then they were like an unstoppable force. To me, that is what's going to happen if you pair Beef Stew with Bobby Portis.
Yeah. Nobody's going to want to go up against that front court there, and it is funny considering they got in a little spat at some point this season, but hey, maybe at some point we'll see somebody put their hockey stick down, little knuckle puck action from 90 feet for a three-pointer. Maybe we'll see that this year.
Well, you don't. I love the knuckle puck reference. You don't have room for him. But if you're going to go that route, I want to add James Johnson into the mix, and then nobody will fight us ever.
Yeah. Nobody will want to play Detroit at all. Nobody will want to set foot on the court. And luckily, we'll just, one enforcer after the other at that point.
We'll just have a bunch of forfeits, and then we'll get to the playoffs that way. Great discussion. I like that we highlighted kind of some different routes that they could go. I want to have you back on as the season progresses here to talk more about the team, because again, they're fun to talk about, and it was great coverage. But make sure to tell the people where they can follow you here in the meantime.
Yes, I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky. My handle is BobbyBucket313. Try to stay looped into all of Detroit sports, but Really, it's the Pistons right now. And then all of our writing, we got a good group of guys at DetroitBadBoys.com, constantly putting out previews, recaps, and what Ryan referred to earlier, my Under the Hood article that I've been doing has all the Motor City puns in it, doing a little film breakdown after each game. So you can find all my stuff there.
Yeah, I love that one. And like you said, there's a lot of great writers there. We've had Sean Corp on the show. We've had Brady Fredrickson. We're going to have others. We're going to have Brennan Sims on the show. So we're going to prominently feature the Detroit Bad Boys crew because they always bring
awesome.
it. But we'll definitely be sure to have you back too, and appreciate the time. And now it's getting close to tea time here.
Yeah, you're right. Chamomile tea time. Yeah, I would love to come back anytime, Ryan. It was a great conversation, and I guess I'll have to come back after the deadline. We're going to have to see if our predictions were right or not.